everyone, and welcome to our first episode of Thriving Thursdays Multilingualism Matters. For those of you who are new here, this is a project designed by SIETAR Austria, the Society for Intercultural Education, Training and Research. My name is Karin Martin, and after the great success of our online 30 minutes talks about mindfulness in 2020, we are starting today with this new online series, which is taking place every 2 weeks from today throughout the whole year. So thank you for being here. And if you want to find out more about SIETAR Austria, you can visit our website, www.sietar.at. Also, please feel free to contact us if you have any questions or suggestions for our future talks. So let's start. At SIETAR Austria, we see multilingualism as an asset and as a resource for individual and for the society. Our goal is to promote and foster multilingualism, not only in the region where we live, the south of Austria, Carinthia, but also around the world. So we haven't decided for a specific topic today. We just want to start the conversation around it. And therefore, it's a pleasure for me. I'm excited and honored to introduce our first guest today, Professor Antonella Sorace. So thank you, Antonella, for accepting our invitation. You are Professor of Developmental Linguistics at the University of Edinburgh. You are a world-leading authority in the field of bilingualism across the lifespan, and you're also the founding director of the Research and Information Engagement Center, Bilingualism Matters. So we want to start with this, and we would like to know what motivated you at the very beginning when you decided to create this center more than 10 years ago.
Because I was very aware of how little people know about multilingualism and bilingualism and language learning, and how many misconceptions and prejudices are still around. And I really became even more aware of this as a parent, because I have two bilingual sons who grew up with English and Italian. And so I was really aware in my dealing with society about how little people knew. And so I thought maybe researchers like us who do research precisely in this field have some responsibility to make sure that our research gets out of the ivory towers and reaches people and allows people to make informed decisions about their children, about their students, about their patients, about their policies, you name it. And so I started Bilingualism Matters, very small, locally in Edinburgh, parents and teachers. And very soon we started receiving many expressions of interest from other sectors, policymakers, health professionals, eventually businesses as well. And so we started expanding our range of collaborations, and we started expanding internationally as well. And now we have an international network of 28 branches in 3 different continents, and we're going to open 3 more before the end of June.
Wow, congratulations. That's really amazing. It's very inspiring and also worthy of respect. You know, you had this vision and you're just put it into practice. And Antonella, last Sunday, 21st of February, was International Mother Tongue Day. And I know your center planned different online events. I know you're still celebrating, right? And we know there's a lot of discussion around this term, mother tongue, sometimes synonym of native language, first language, home language, dominant language. So let's try to clarify a little bit. So what the term mother tongue means to you personally, but also what is the current definition that you're using in your research work?
The term mother tongue generally refers to one's native language. So the language or languages, because there can be more than one,
exactly,
that people actually grew up in and so on. There are, so my native language is Italian, you know, in that respect. And there are people who think that your native language, your mother tongue, is always related to more emotionality because you grow up with it and so on. I don't think that's actually true, because if you start using a second language on a regular basis, then many of your emotional states actually are related, start being related to the second language. And so it's not an exclusive, you know, area for the first language or the mother tongue. So it seems to me that, yes, the concept of native language or native languages still has a meaning, but one has to be aware that it's not that if you are a speaker, a native speaker of a language, you are a native speaker, the same native speaker for life. Because we know from research that learning another language actually changes your native language. Not in the sense that you lose it, but in the sense that it changes in very specific and predictable ways. And this is absolutely normal. So two languages in contact affect each other in both directions, both in the same brain, so in individuals, but also in communities. And so that is should be better understood, that, you know, and should actually persuade people that we can't treat bilinguals as the sum of two monolingual speakers. This is a mantra that we keep telling people, right? A bilingual is not the sum of two monolinguals. They shouldn't be expected to behave like monolingual in language B, and monolingual in language A, and monolingual in language B, because that's impossible. Bilinguals are not like two monolinguals in one.
In the same person, you're right. Yeah, I mean, it's really something that many people still think, right? Still many myths and prejudices about this topic. And but talking specifically about this, then my question would be, what is bilingualism? What makes a person bilingual? Maybe I should say plurilingual, knowing the audience, there are many people who speak way more than two languages. So what is your definition?
Well, we use the term bilingual and bilingualism, like in Bilingualism Matters, my center, in a broad sense, in a very general sense, to denote more than one. So bilingualism also means trilingualism, quadrilingualism, multilingualism, or plurilingualism, depending on you know, which word you want to use. So it really means more than one. And that is consistent with research so far. Research so far shows differences between having one language and having more than one language. We still need more research to know whether there is really a difference between speaking two languages and speaking three languages, or speaking three languages and speaking four. But what really matters at the moment, what really comes out in an explicit way, is the difference between knowing one and knowing more than one. From the point of view of effects, you know, on ways of thinking and ways of behaving outside the language domain. So that seems to be the crucial difference.
Yes, I see there are many questions coming. Thank you, everyone. We'll have time later for the questions, and I will ask my colleagues, Ethne, maybe I will unmute you to help me, yes, to catch up with the question that I don't see. And Antonella, I'd like to ask you, so what is the focus here? Is it about being able to communicate, to speak different languages, right? So if you say a person is bilingual or plurilingual, let's say, because he can speak, he can communicate in different languages. What about writing? Is that right? Is this focus on communication? What do you think?
Well, there are different ways of being multilingual, and that, is also what we try to convey to society. So being bilingual in a broad sense is not a black and white thing. It's not that you're either bilingual or you're not bilingual. So you can be bilingual and multilingual in many different ways. For example, you can be a fluent speaker without having full literacy, for example, in both languages. So full literacy in the sense of, full ability to both read and write in a fluent way. And so we conceptualize multilingualism as a continuum that really goes from very superficial, maybe limited school-based knowledge of another language, all the way to fluent use and command and full literacy in more than one language. But there are many, many different shades in between.
Yes.
So there are many different ways of being multilingual and not only one.
Sure, totally agree with you. And I know in your research work, you bring together methods from linguistics, experimental psychology, and cognitive science. And I know you worked and published also work about bilingualism in the lifespan, so with different people of different ages. So my question is, maybe tricky, but let's try. Can adults learn to speak a foreign language without an accent? So again, this idea of the perfect speaker. But I'm curious to know, if I start to learn a language later in life, will I be able to reach this so-called native-like level?
It's a very good question, but may I point out that probably it's not the right way of putting the question or phrasing the question, right? So again, we were saying before, them being native-like or being a native speaker is not something permanent that never changes. And there are many different ways of being a native speaker as well, right? Not everybody speaks in the same way and so on. So when we compare bilinguals and multilinguals to monolingual native speakers, which native speaker are we talking about? So that is already a very big question. Your question of whether it's possible to learn a second language very well when you're an adult, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
But
Good news.
well, yes. Does it mean that learning a foreign language very well implies acquiring a perfect accent? Well, what is a perfect accent? Whose accent are we talking about? There are many different accents. Some are more prestigious than others. So, when we talk about acquiring a native-like accent, what is the point of reference? So it seems to me that we shouldn't really reason that in that way. We should accept that, well, adults usually have less time than children. Think of a young child. They're fully immersed in their language or languages, they can grab any opportunity. Adults are a little bit busier. They may have families, they may have jobs, and less time to devote, to learning another language. So it's not so much a question of not being able from a neurological point of view because your brain changes in a completely unchangeable way. I think it's more of a question of opportunities and time scale as well. So yes, it is possible to reach a very high level of competence in more than one language, even if you start later in life. You may not have the same time scale. We are doing research on much older people who are exposed to a new language for the first time. I'm talking about people in their 70s or 80s, right? I mean, those people, we see that the brain responds very well. It responds very well to the challenge of learning another language. They may not have, the time scale, the same time scale as a 20-year-old, to improve the language, right? But the fact that the brain can engage, with the challenge of learning a new language, even much later in life, should be very encouraging. And we should be realistic, in terms of what can be achieved, but it's never too late. This is what I would say to people. It's never too late.
Yeah, that's great news for everyone. You mentioned the magic word for me because it's so interesting, the brain. right? So can you mention briefly what are the main differences in the brains of bilinguals and monolinguals? You were you were talking about old age, but what about children? What about children growing up with more than one language from birth, for example?
Well, there are well attested neurological effects of learning more than one language on the brain in terms not only of, extra gray matter, or matter in particular areas of the brain, not everything, but, particular areas of the brain, even when you start learning a language as an adult. So again, the brain, the plasticity of the brain, this is one of the major discoveries of the last 50 years. The brain is a lot more flexible and a lot more plastic than anybody thought, for languages and for other things as well. And this is
Yes,
good news, right?
absolutely.
So more, additional matter, but also additional connectivity within the brain and across certain areas of the brain. So those are the two, major effects that have been found, the effects of multilingualism. Of course, it also depends on at what age you start and so on. But these brain effects can be found also in people who start a language as adults. So you don't need to be very, very young or a young child. You can learn a language and have this major connectivity, increased connectivity, even if you learn a language as an adult.
And what about brain disease? Alzheimer. I know there are studies about this. Maybe you can mention briefly that as well.
Yes, that's one of the main misconceptions of research as well, right? I get journalists asking me, is it true that if you're bilingual, you don't get Alzheimer's? And I always say, I wish it was true, but it's not. So clearly there's no relationship between being multilingual, bilingual, multilingual, and the likelihood of getting, a pathological, a disease like Alzheimer's or other types of dementia. What research is showing at the moment is that being multilingual can have a delaying effect on the first unambiguous symptoms of the disease. Approximately 4 or 5 years. This is what the still limited number of studies actually show. We need more research, like in every area, right? And so, we can't say this is the truth, but what these studies actually show is that multilinguals may still get Alzheimer's or whatever the type of dementia is, but the unambiguous symptoms of the disease become visible 4 or 5 years later. That is an amazing thing if it's confirmed by further research, because it means 4 or 5 years of more independent life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is invaluable.
Yes, extremely important. And Antonella, before we open up for the questions from the audience, we would like to know, at SIETAR Austria, we're also interested to know our guests a bit better. So I'd like to ask you a more personal question. How did languages play a role, a part in your career? How important they were and why? We're talking about the potential, the market potential of multilingualism.
I was always interested in languages, partly because of my own experience. I grew up with Italian mostly and Sardinian in the background because my
Which,
mother
nice.
but she never spoke Sardinian to me because she thought that Sardinian wasn't a very useful language.
I
And
can relate.
conceptions that we are actually fighting. If you have a minority language there at your doorstep, you should regard yourself as amazingly lucky. And governments should invest in bilingualism, having the opportunity, giving the opportunity to people to grow up with more than one language. Absolutely great. So I grew up with passive knowledge of Sardinian and Italian, and then I started learning English in my teen years, not too early. And then I did linguistics at the university, and I became interested in how people learn languages and so on. And so, yes, I started from my personal experience but then I went beyond personal experience. And I started from second language acquisition in adults. That was my speciality when I was a student. But then I broadened up, my interest to bilingualism in general at different stages of life.
Yes, very interesting. Can I ask you, what measures do you take to stay proficient in multiple languages? Do you do anything?
There are loads of tests, that, as I said, being bilingual is a continuum. So there are many different ways of measuring, proficiency, if you want, or ability, active abilities, passive abilities, but even brain reactions, brain functions in the absence of behavioral differences. So there are some interesting studies now that show, for example, that passive exposure to languages can actually have an effect on the brain without, before it has any behavioral effect. This is research done by colleagues in California, and so it's very promising. So there are many different ways in which you can measure bilingualism and the effects of language exposure.
That's amazing. I could stay here and listen to you for hours, but we have a limit amount of time and time is flying. I'm asking my colleague Ethne if you can help me out, please, with the question. I saw there was a lot of interaction in the chat. Ethne Knapic is our president for SIETAR Austria. Thank you, Ethne. You're welcome.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
Hi, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, comments in the chat, but no direct questions as such. But I would like to start off straight away with a question of my own, because thank you very much, first of all, Antonella. This is fascinating, and I know we have many people who are interested also in hopefully having a recording of today's talk. But one of the things that we're interested in doing in this series is to really deal exactly with these misconceptions around language learning. And one of the things I've been exposed to again this week is, for example, in the after school where my daughter goes, where there are a number of new migrant children, and my daughter speaks English as well as German, and the new kids also speak in English more than they speak in German, and there is a strict forbidding of communication in English because the parents and the people responsible are very concerned about the acquisition of the new language being sort of delayed as a result. So maybe you could also comment on this question of language acquisition and some misconceptions around fears with not possibly advancing in a new language.
I think that, what you said is not an unusual situation, right? I mean, we are familiar with that. And my first reaction is that creates an unfavorable atmosphere for language acquisition, because it creates, tensions around languages and language learning that children really don't need. I mean, we see that, the more tension is associated, with speaking particular languages or not, that has a negative effect on language learning and on children's attitudes and willingness, to learn them and to speak them. So I think, people should be more relaxed. I mean, clearly a child, who, is in a German environment, a German speaking, they need to learn enough German to function well in school, but they can without, creating barriers, for other languages or for their home languages. We have many parents here, who think, migrant parents, who think that it's better to stop speaking their home language so that they can help their child to integrate linguistically and socially. And we tell them, look, there's no need to do that. Your child needs to hear enough English, but if they do, they will learn English without sacrificing your home language, your family communication, your emotional communication, and the advantages of being bilingual. So,
yes.
Yes.
Antonella, related to this, I saw a comment in the chat about mixing languages. Maybe you can mention briefly what you found, or your language mixing.
First of all, I would like to say that mixing language is very regular. So mixing language, is seen by some people as a sign of confusion. But in fact, what we know about mixing is that it follows precise grammatical rules. So a child who mixes the two languages, they follow implicit rules. So it's not a random behavior. So it's much more, it denotes, a much better knowledge of both languages than people think. There is now, a new movement in the area of bilingualism, bilingual research towards translanguaging. This is a term that is gaining ground, and that partly refers to the fact that allowing children to switch, from one language to the other without stopping them or making them feel bad because they are doing that is actually positive. And it relates to what I was saying before. Don't create a negative environment about languages. If a child doesn't know that the word, in the language they're speaking, and they use the word from another language, well, that's fine. That's fine. They will learn the word in due course. But allowing more freedom, in language learning and in language use is probably not a bad idea. I mean, of course, children have to learn also when it's appropriate, to mix, when it's appropriate to speak only one language, but they will if you give them time.
So would you recommend parents to keep the languages separated? I mean, if this is even possible, of course, it depends on the situation.
It depends on families, many different families are all different, right? So the one parent, one language situation, which is very well known, right? Each parent speaks their own language, is probably the most well-known system, but it's not the only system. And there are families who choose to speak only the minority language and they leave the majority language outside the home. Or there are, different kinds, some families speak only the majority language and the child learns another language at school if teaching, if education happens in that language. So there isn't a single system that is good for everybody. Families are different, situations are different, and there are different ways. What is crucial for all these methods is the fact that the child has to hear enough of each language in situations that they find engaging, in situations that they find motivating, because a young child doesn't need language lessons. A child does, especially young, they don't know what to do with language lessons. So we don't teach languages to children. We speak languages to children. We create situations in which children want to use that language.
Yes, Antonella, when you say children need to hear enough of the language, how much is enough? I know that's another tricky question, but what would you say? How can you identify a number of hours during the week or something like that?
It's very difficult to, identify a precise number of hours. Also because all situations are different, and children are also different. They don't always have the same, the same brain, the same circumstances, the same availability. I mean, what we recommend, if there are two languages, trying to, achieve kind of half and half. It doesn't mean that you count the number of hours on a time watch, but it means, trying to keep them in balance so that roughly, they are balanced with each other. Mm-hmm. That's all we can say.
Yes, thank you very much. I see we have 1 minute less.
Karin, there's a very interesting question. It was actually one of the first ones
that came
in. Sorry, no, but I think if we could maybe just go back and pick it up. It's from Peter Wilk, who points out that there are studies from Australia that have found that multilingualism directly relates to the level of creativity people show. He would like to know whether you can confirm these findings.
It depends on how you define creativity, of course, right? But I think, some of the potential benefits that I mentioned earlier may actually be related to creativity, right? So you know, being able to see the potential in the situations in which you speak the language, you know, seeing the other person's perspective and being able to, you know, adjust the communication according to the person you're talking to, being able to appreciate other points of view. I mean, all of those are, if you want, elements of creativity in a broad sense. So again, it depends on definitions, but I think, you know, definitely, you know, research points in that direction. But let's remember that these benefits are not automatic, right? I mean, it's not that they emerge. It depends on positive situations, positive environments, positive attitudes that parents, teachers, society in general can have. And it's so important for children to be surrounded by positive attitudes. This is what we are trying to contribute to in society.
And this is actually our goal as well. We want to promote multilingualism. We want to spread these positive attitudes, as you said. And therefore, I would like to thank you so much for joining us and for starting this conversation towards this goal. It's 6:30, so I'm afraid we need to stop here our conversation. I would like to thank you, Antonella. First of all, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your expertise, and maybe we can repeat in the future. I don't know if you're open, and maybe we can do another talk at the end of the year, and let's see what changed. That would be interesting for us. I would like to thank you, anyone who joined. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here. Remember that you can check our website, SIETAR.at, to see who's the next guest. I'm not going to tell you anything, surprise. And remember that we're going to meet every 2 weeks with this 30 minutes talk. And I would like to thank you, Ethne, as well, for helping me with this conversation and the comments. I wish you oh, sorry.
If people have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'll be very
nice.
Questions.
That's great, Antonella. Yes, by the way, we're going to keep, of course, the record of the chat and everything. And feel free to send us also some ideas or questions that you have for future talks. So I wish everyone a nice evening. Thank you very much again. And I'll see you maybe in 2 weeks next time. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.